How this talk is organized. First, my thesis and an introduction to the problem I'm addressing, followed by how the history should not be taught. Next, the similarities between music composition and writing the histories, and what we can learn from this. Finally, Munson's solution to the problem. My thesis today is simple. Herodotus' histories is not an invention like a clap of thunder, nor does it represent stream of consciousness exposition. To appreciate its significance requires understanding the basic framework and how the parts interrelate. For the histories to be more widely known and appreciated, these structural rules require general public awareness. It also requires bridging the gap of centuries between the cultural universe of Herodotus and the 21st century. A corollary to help establish awareness among the public is to require, when an institution proposes to teach the histories, that it provides supplementary support to a qualified teacher in Ionian Greek, including practical teaching tools. An accepted European approach is to emphasize the consecutio tempore and undertake the analisi logica, but even that approach does not explain how and why the whole text hangs together 2,500 years after it was written. The current course description on the histories is enhance your understanding of the Greek language by translating passages taken from the histories by Herodotus. That's all. I pose the question, what if the teacher is a specialist in patrist Greek? Will they refuse to answer grammar questions because the Ionian dialect is not their field? The answer is yes. I had that experience. The teacher said that the Greek, Herodotus Greek, was 1,000 years older than the Greek he practiced, and he could not answer any question. Another experience was after calling on a student to translate a subsection, and there's no reaction, the professor tries to stimulate the class by waxing poetic over the unwarranted death of Adrastus in only 38 words, waxing philosophical over Cleobis and Biton, enhancing Herodotus' lyrical creativity, Ray Arion, and explaining the story of Rhampsinitus with much irony. What is result? The student audience gapes and gasps at the unorthodoxy. This was not expected. The prof must then manage to keep their attention and help them overcome the shock. The students were provided with lightly edited texts in single-page photocopy handouts. The neophyte Herodotus student was told to follow the text because it makes sense. We were asked to remember what happened before and/or were briefed on what would happen after. Students were told to rely on their 3-year investment in studying Greek grammar. And then came the direction, please translate. The class froze. No one volunteered to translate. The teacher suffered, was frustrated, and fled prophetic pastures. Would it not have been easier if the building blocks of Herodotus' composition had been made available to his students besides the text, and the presumption that one can bridge the cultural gaps of thousands of years by simple verbatim translation of verb tenses? There are 16 potholes embedded in the history. When a cyclist hits a pothole, he feels a jarring sensation as his sense of gravity is shaken. He may even lose his balance. Surely it is a distracting feeling that may lead one to fall off. The same occurs when the neophyte encounters what may be labeled as Herodotus's potholes. Here is a list: cultural potholes, lyric poetry, epic drama, straightforward reporting of observation, word of mouth. Potholes involving value systems, customs, ethics, mythology, religion. And then neo-scientific potholes: astronomy, geography, cartography, ethnography, earth science, technology, archaeology, and of course, measurements and standards of measurement of time, of distance, of degree, of demographic evolution. Herodotus' idea included these studies, absorbed mainly through the medium of orality and some ancient scripts. By contrast, the 21st century student has never delved into each. Knowledge has been handed to him on a silver platter and in the popular medium, images flashing by on available screens, fully backed by physical evidence. Two more potholes exist. As the 21st century is oriented towards narrative chronology, the first item leading to the second, to the third, etc., resulting from the current medium. If he is asked to jump back a few years, or is asked to compare and contrast two similar phenomena in completely different universes, he must try to do so. And if he is asked to do this, even 100 words or after each section of a work, he again may hesitate. Herodotus' world was oral. Therefore, chronology, cause, and effect were abstractions. This explains why the query leading to, now what is he talking about? And I thought he has already spoken about this earlier. Why is he returning to it? Is constantly perplexing to our contemporaries. Political dogma was non-existent in Herodotus' time. The chronicle world was young, and the only relative political discussion focused on the type of government, democracy versus autocracies, which forms the background to the Persian Wars. All these stumbling blocks exist because until today there's no 21st century handbook explaining the state of each pothole or discipline as it was understood in Herodotus' time, its evolution over time, and how it should be considered within the context of today's reality. Here is an oral community in Cambodia. Herodotus belongs to an early generation that practiced literacy. His cultural heritage was oral. Orality requires intellectual discipline and develops many skills. First of all, memory, then abstract thinking, then mimicry, then melodic recall. When everyday living found it necessary to adapt abstract concepts in a practical way, it discovered completely new realities on an intuitive basis. It was the need to travel to amplify human and economic expansion. As a result of first astronomy, then geography developed. Greek paideia taught these skills to its offspring. I cannot further elaborate, for this is not my area of expertise. In this case, the parallel discipline music can lend a helping hand. The role of music is of paramount importance to understand the histories. It was the Greeks who invented the scale, the same scale we use today. Whether by chance or by experiment, they solved the conundrum of pitch. Every octave is the exact mathematical equivalent of frequencies in relation to the octave above or the one below. The result is the 12-tone scale we see, 7 white keys plus 5 black keys. Intervals and half intervals between the tones are determined mathematically. Each white key generates its own 7-note mode. Musical modes elicit underlying emotional balances, as in literature's lyrical mode and dramatic mode. In music, the happy mode is the major mode rooted on the do pitch, while the sad mode is the aeolian or minor mode rooted on the la pitch. Differences between modes are determined on where the half tones fall. In early times, there were many modes. Arion probably sang in one of them. The Lydian mode on the re pitch, the Phrygian mode on the fa pitch, and so on. These modes exist in native song worldwide today. Composed, not written. Music is a discipline that has an important role in honing the creative mind. It is an exact science of organized sounds that make statements. Word composers use many of the same techniques as Arion in his song. Melody is the counterpart of narrative. A strophe begins at A, develops, modulates, resolves, and concludes at B. Modulating harmony, as it progresses from one key to another, is the equivalent of chronology, aided by transitions and all its devices. Through the medium of counterpoint, as in Bach's 2- and 3-part inventions, parallel lives can be brought into indirect comparison, each continuing on its own separate path, but intersecting in certain key moments. Croesus on the pyre and Cyrus. Croesus advising Cyrus on the Lydian revolt. Croesus warning Cyrus before the Macedonian incursion. The Istor investigated and focused. He composed his work using the same techniques as a composer. He transitions from one scene to another, in music from one key to another. He slows down the rhythm to better develop the main theme by introducing insertions and descriptions in music, parallel movement between sections. He jogs memory by analepsis and prepares for future events by prolepsis. In music, the original theme repeats, or a new tonal scheme is introduced in a different key. He introduces an event and then concludes it, thereby creating drama by mood shifts, emphasis, repetition, work in the same scene from different points of view, that of the defeated Croesus, that of the triumphant Cyrus, that of the individual, that of the society subjected to the individual against its will. Through the medium of counterpoint, I've already said this. This slide is an aside. I wonder if we have time to read through it. I put it in the handout notes with a great explanation of the importance of Gratus at Parnassum, which is based on Greek mathematical theory and Euclidean perfection. And that is the basis of today's classical music, even 12-tone music if you want. Brooks was the Austrian court composer and summarized the rules that applied to musical competition. Keystone of Dr. Munson's dissertation is how Herodotus opens and closes various events. How this is understood and internalized by its audience is essential if the histories are to be appreciated for another 1,000 years or two. It was written by a graduate student who intended to make the histories her mission. She wished to learn all she could about Herodotus' approach, style, techniques, and modus operandi. In homage to the effort, one should recall that at that time there was no Greek typeface on Western typewriters. One might find it only in Greece. There were no electronic books for rapid consultation. It was a lengthy, exhausting, handwritten process, and its final presentation was submitted in 2 tranches. One, the text containing the summation of the exploratory work, and 2, the notes to back up, illustrate, and enrich the text. Dr. Munson asserts that all introductions and conclusions, whether prospective, retrospective, resumptive, or programmatic or simple summary, are statements that more or less eloquently recap the narrative theme, that is, which is the equivalent of the musical concept, as in Beethoven's Fifth, ta 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 ta. When narrating a story, a factual report, an investigation, one has to know how to transit from A to B without losing audience attention. The tool to use to control the audience is a connective sentence or a group of logoi with framing sentences. Slide list few building blocks that were indicated on the last. Oh, wait a second. If the history is a combination of different narratives that knit together, the author's essential task is complex. Dr. Munson identified these building blocks of the histories and named the overarching method applied as transitions. In effect, the narrative moves, transits from one event to another, from one time period to another, and so on. This slide lists a few building blocks that were indicated on the last slide. The narrative is contained in a report or logos. Each logos has a framework with an introduction and a conclusion. It may also contain different sections. Transitions shift the audience's or the reader's attention to a new report or a new logos. Between logoi, there may be an interlude when Herodotus relates some aspects that is important. These in-between parts or insertions add breadth and dimension to the narrative. The result is not a chronology of events as 21st century culture is trained to expect, but an integrated interpretation of the world as Herodotus perceived it within the context of the East-West conflict. How this, if teachers showed this kind of scheme to their students and explained it and all the terms, it would be much easier to teach histories. Several framing systems are indicated on this slide. They are defined, as Emma War states, as appearing at the beginning of sections of the narrative, with summary ones at the end that function as signposts marking the stages of the work progress, form and thought in Herodotus 1966. The introductory statement usually contains elements of special emphasis. In music, the same rules apply to framing systems. In music, it is usually abbreviated as 1, 4, 5, 5, 7, 1. The introductory statement, the equivalent of the tonic key, usually creates a bridge to the next section by the subdominant that emphasizes well-known facts and then returns via the dominant to the tonic home base. The narrative thread is the melodic curve. When slowing down, rallentando, abrupt endings correspond to melodic and harmonic rhythm. Transitions from one scene to another equate to modulation from one key to another. Chiasmus is inversion. Point of transition is the passing tone returning to the tonic. Basket weave composition is parallel motion. Now we come to the organizing devices listed in the dissertation. First of all, as we stated, framing systems. And the first framing system encapsulates the Croesus logo, logos of Book 1. In the proem, Herodotus pays homage to acts great and small that should be remembered, lest they be forgotten. It begins at 5.3 and 6.1, and not upon the arrival of Solon at 29.1, which is a common mistake or a lesson in forgetting what one has read. The technical terms used are summary introduction, resumptive conclusion, and summary conclusion. Now, For you people, this is old hat. And it really is very boring if I keep on reading all these different details, which somebody who doesn't have any understanding of this, I'm not going to read it to you because it's boring for you. It's there in the and I think we can go on to the next one. The organizers devices to the change of agent. If the histories is a combination of different narratives that are knitted concisely together, the author's task, as I said, is complex. The compositional devices used are building blocks and are labeled by the overarching method applied as transitions. In effect, the narrative transitions, bridging time and geographic gaps, moving from one event to another, from one time period to another, forward and backward from one mood to another. A change of agent occurs within a logos or between logoi when there is a shift in the narrative from one sphere of activity to another. Basket weave narrative occurs when two sets of agents transition between A and B, and the original agent returns to A. The simplest basket weave construction is vertical when Cyrus leaves Mazaris ends the Lydian rebellion led by Pactius. He sickens and dies, and Harpagus too is appointed, who conquers Ionia, the Phocaeans, the Teians, the Carians, etc. Cyrus reemerges in northeast Asia, conquering all those nations. Cyrus has retired to Ecbatana, leaving Mazaris and Harpagus. In this case, the change of agent is organic, as there is spatial continuity, the mopping up exercise after the fall of Lydia. In short, there's only a change of direction. The vertical hanging down insertion is connected to the neighboring text. The circular looped insertion indicates how the agent Cyrus leaves for Ecbatana and reappears in a different setting in Northeast Asia. Here, this insertion is formal and inorganic because it involves a change of setting as well as of agent. This historical narrative, however, would be linear and continuous. Complex basket weave. While incidental insertions may hang on vertically or are circular, transitional descriptions tend to have a logical relationship with the preceding segment and lean against it. They discuss people and places that are already extant in the historical narrative and have played a major role in the action. In these passages, there is at least exchange of subject, including events, monuments, and customs that occur after an emphatic conclusion of a phase of the action. The result is they appear to be formally disconnected in varying degrees from the narrative that immediately precedes or follows. This scheme shows how passages concern many different spheres of activity can become irregular, intertwined in the historical narrative. The coherence and clarity of a basket weave account depends largely upon the form, the substance of the transitions that express chronological and logical relationships between adjoining sections pertaining to different agents, as well as transitions joining several sections pertaining to the same agent. And you can see how Aristochorus appears twice, and the Ionians also twice, the Cyprians also twice, Darius, who runs everything, only once, the Persian generals twice, Histiaeus twice, and the others enter and exit twice. A linear historical narrative would not have all of these interludes or another organizing device is parallel action. Now, if you look on the left side, you will see a series of 5 events. And on the right side, you will see a series of 4 events that occur at the same time or just about the same time. Okay. So parallel action is logical, but when one is reading the text in the 21st century style, he is terribly confused. What is going on here? How can we go from Aristogoras to the Sardis fire and the Cyprian revolt and then Darius's reaction? It just doesn't make sense unless somebody explains what parallel action or counterpoint is allowing to happen. Next, syncretism. Just as in counterpoint, where one voice superimposes itself on another, the storyline seems to move forward and backward at the same time. It's not, these movements are not to be mistaken as insertions, seemingly pausing the action to allow a description insertion to be introduced. Example 1 is when series of events B presupposes another A. This occurrence establishes a direct relationship between A and B. B takes place after A has concluded. The second is a series of events, A, that are still taking place when B begins to occur. For example, when Darius sends a message to one general while concomitantly in a different location, B, the Ionian revolt is taking place. There is a time overlap before the message reaches Darius's army. Darius's orders are held in abeyance and cannot be executed. The third, while Cyrus is approaching Babylon with his army A, Herodotus intervenes with a description of the city, its customs, and its distractions, the dotted line, after which, post-quote, Cyrus invades the city. Main conclusions and their explanatory function. Now, here again, I'm going to just give you the introducing blurb because I think you people know these things better than I do. It was suggested that I provide an example of how the same organizing device, this time the particle men, can be used to obtain different results. Here are a few examples. To recap, statements with men closing a section summarize and mark a pause in the report. In most cases, the men conclusion takes the form of a retrospective sentence characterized by an analytic demonstrative pronoun or adjective, this much of this sort, or adverb in this way, referring to the information given in the preceding account. There are 40 men conclusions in Book 1, of which 35 are retrospective sentences. The 5 examples on the screen are of various lengths and types. Each identifies the passage in its entirety in different ways of greater or lesser complexity. Overall, they articulate several explanatory functions. Both the first and the second, Harpagus' conquest of Phocaea, such was what happened, is far less specific than this is how it happened, that closes the narrative of Liatis' war against the Milesians and Thrasybulus. Both are retrospective conclusions. The topic in 3 and 4 defined by Gnomus with authorial intervention and votive offerings. Therefore, it's programmatic. A dismissal using the third person imperative in for enough about such gifts is equivalent to an authorial intervention to close a section. It is a programmatic conclusion. The demonstrative toyuto such that replaces a specific term in the if is a tag that summarizes the end of a section without unveiling its contents. The left the layout of, I don't know how we're doing in time. The layout of Munson's transitions in, oh my God. That, Munson splits her book into two areas in the first chapter. First, the elements of transition particles are listed and described one by one. The heart of the book, however, is part two, the substance of transitions. It has several entries. Each represents separate building blocks, transitions that divide and establish relations, the change of agent, the complex change of agent, insertions, the dramatic sections within the historical narrative. The right column explains how all these elements are welded together, interwoven in the fabric of the narrative. This is the core grammar of the histories. Once the significance of each is recognized, there will be no further stumbling blocks to understand whether the narrative is progressing or catching up with something mentioned before or to be fully developed later. Once the student appreciates how the elements and their variants work together and is trained to detect them, the histories will be better diffused, understood, and appreciated. Munson's transitions in Herodotus is the foundational groundwork for Herodotus' histories. Today's propaganda associates the Iranian nation, formerly Persia, to a pariah state, which is not helpful for 21st century audiences. The histories is a broad, overarching composition that aims to include the whole of civilization known at the time. It was constructed to encompass all the then known disciplines of the universe. A disappointment for the lazy ones, for those more curious, a challenge. Without proper briefing on the rules of composition, the student is put off by the sudden stops and starts, back references, details left out, and reported only later. Once the building blocks of the histories are well known, it will be reasonable for the neophyte to accept that the fall of Astyages of media reported earlier can only be fully understood once it is inserted in the logos of the early life of Cyrus. In slide 9 and in your handout, I mentioned Johann Joseph Fuchs, which is basic. Now let me introduce you to Walter Piston, the son of Angelo Pistone. Like Rosaria Vignolo Munson, Walter Piston's origins are North Italian. He graduated from Harvard summa cum laude and was tenured professor there from 1926 to 1960. A composer, teacher, and author, he first published Harmony in 1941 and Counterpoint in 1947. Thank you. I am humbled to have been allowed to make this presentation in your discipline. Now you can diffuse nonsense transitions in Herodotus by asking questions. My first question is for Professor Munson. A favorite word in your treatise is autonomous. It is used to explain parallel action insertions, as in geography. But how does autonomous differ from independent, free, and separate within the Herodotian framework.